From parchment rolls to digital files, from love letters to business records, there is a place that keeps London's memories. It's called the London Metropolitan Archives, established to collect, preserve, celebrate and share the stories of London and Londoners. It's free for everyone to use. And what's more, they have a book club. I sat down with Claire Titley, who runs the book club, and Charlie Turpie, better known to her many Bookstagram followers as Charlie Books and Coffee, who started by explaining just what the archive does.
We are the archive that holds London's memory. We have records of parish churches, insurance companies, activist groups, schools, insurance, anything and everything that's happened in London. Hopefully you'd be able to find it in London Metropolitan Archives.
And I, slightly to my shame, hadn't heard of the London Metropolitan Archives, but when I looked it up, it says it attracts over 30,000 visitors a year. It deals with a similar number of written inquiries, extensive holdings amounting to over 72 miles of records of local, regional and national importance. With the earliest record dating from 1067, the archive charts the development of the capital into a modern-day major world city. You've also then found it a source of inspiration for your book club, Claire.
I'm a very heavy reader and I come from an English literature background. And when working in the archives, I realised there were lots of writers that used our collections and that our holdings were used by people undertaking research into what certain times in London history would be like, and that there is a real interplay between archive collections and creativity. And I remember having a conversation with Charlie where we talked about book groups. And Charlie nominated me as the person to do the London Metropolitan Archives book group. This was quite a long time ago now. This is probably about 5 or 6 years. We will choose a book that relates to London. It has to have a London theme. It doesn't necessarily have to be set specifically in London, but London has to be there in the storyline somewhere. And London can be a character or it can be a setting. But what is unique is that we can offer a display of archival documents that might speak to the readers, that might give a greater insight into the material that we've read, that might be something that the writer used themselves, we know that in some places, or maybe that relates to the writer. So if you're looking at a historical writer like Samuel Pepys, we might be able to find reference to him in the archives. So it's sort of a book club with a little bit extra.
Would you then curate a little corner of the archive so that these documents are there for people to see and people can read along with you? Is that a thing? Or is it just for the book club?
It's very much just for the book club on the night. So we do have a number of exhibitions during the year. So some of the important themes around London we look at visually. But actually the work that Claire does, you've got to come along to the book group to get the benefit.
Well, that sounds intriguing.
One of the things that really surprises me, and this is something that I've experienced at other book groups, is how quickly the boundary between strangers is broken and people express things or relate experiences from their own lives. One of the things that really interests me is the discussions we have where people bring to bear their own life experience of being in London in the 60s, of being in London in the 80s, and saying, well, no, actually it wasn't like that, or it was like that, and I did this.
How does it actually work then? What are the mechanics of it? It's open to people to come along?
Yep, it's open to the public. We advertise what the books are in advance. We normally do it on a quarterly basis, so people know what the next few months are and they can order it from their library and things like that. So we try and give people a run-in. Then people come to the session. We normally talk for about an hour. Sometimes people want to talk more, and that's quite fascinating, is which books just get people going and you can't get them to stop. And then we have about half an hour when people can look at the documents. Some displays that you do, particularly if they're views of London or maps and things like that, people can kind of digest quite quickly. But then other things, if you have a lot of text, you kind of have to build in how long it might take people to read things, particularly if you're putting in things that are, 17th century letters or something like that. I remember doing Penelope Lively's City of the Mind, which was a bit of an outlier choice because it wasn't a huge seller, I don't think, and a lot of people hadn't heard of it. But it was about an architect working on the development of Docklands. And one of the really lovely things was to be able to show people the material we have relating to the Docklands development and how it actually was first mooted much earlier in the 20th century than people realised. That there were suggestions that it would be a mainly residential, local, low-scale redevelopment supporting local communities and businesses in the 1970s. And then by the 1980s, when the London Docklands Development Corporation came into being, it became this powerhouse of business and finance and swept aside many concerns of the people that lived there. And I was able to produce some material relating to community activism that showed how this was a contested area and how that had actually been picked up in the book being written much later with that reflection. And people did say to me at the time, well, I'm really surprised I didn't know this history of Docklands. Which
I think the thing about London is it's always more complicated than you think it is. There's always something a bit more to explore and to look into and to think about. And the books make us do that. So having the archives that make you think in a different way is a real bonus.
It sounds so fascinating. I love the idea of being able to see actual materials that relate to the thing that you read. It must really bring it to life. So is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? Is it a mixture?
in theory, it's both. In practice, fiction produces better discussions.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not sure why this is. I have mulled over this. I think with fiction, people are more likely to express their opinions on whether they liked it and why they liked it. I think with non-fiction, if you're reading something as a non-expert and somebody is writing as someone who may be an expert, unless you are a reviewer or a historian or somebody who spends a lot of time reading non-fiction, I think it can be quite hard to judge whether non-fiction is good or accurate or... I don't know, Charlie, you might feel differently about this.
I think there is certainly something around, have I got the right to contest this account? And in fiction, it is somebody's way and shaping and views, whereas in non-fiction, it feels like this is an expert talking. I haven't got the right to challenge it.
A non-fiction book that we did relatively recently was Ben Judah's This Is London.
Just a quick podcast aside here. So that is consistently our most downloaded episode that we have ever done. It was episode 9, listeners for the pod, if you haven't heard it. Ben Judah's This Is London. Go on, tell us about it.
The group hated it. And in a way that I didn't expect, they felt aggrieved on so many levels.
It's quite a provocative book in many ways.
It is. And many of them expressed the feeling that it didn't reflect the London they lived in and that it was sensationalist. It was really interesting to see how that played out. But non-fiction is so varied now. I think we're in a particularly rich period for non-fiction, particularly the number of narratives that now bring the author in. The I exists in non-fiction now in a way that it possibly didn't 10 years ago.
What are some other things that stand out in your memory as things that have been good?
Do you want to talk about Margery Allingham?
I shall take
Which is our most recent book group read.
I really like the works of Margery Allingham, who was a writer who wrote detective stories, sort of, from the 1930s to the 1950s.
Is it the Campion novels?
It is the novels of
I've never read
Albert Campion.
Yeah.
And we looked at The Tiger and the Smoke, which is the most Londony of them all. And it was a really great book group meeting because there were people with lots of different interests. So there was a man who had never read The Tiger and the Smoke but knew everything, and I mean everything there was to know about London fog.
Oh, right.
So
it's very specific interest.
Very specific, but really, really helpful.
Fascinating, because he was able to put into context this setting. I'd rolled up with my book on London fogs, and he was there, just able to give context, to give colour to how realistic was this portrayal, how much was this part of life in post-war London. It was just fantastic.
And would you recommend that one? Is it a good read?
Well, I would say that because I really like Margery Allingham. But yes, it is a good read because it really gives you a side of London that you don't see now. It's post-war, it's sleazy, people are having to find ways of earning a living. But it also has the eternal London of people living in very different circumstances, quite close by each other. And how do you cope with poverty and riches? And there's just so much in it. So I think most people would get something from it.
What I found really fascinating, though, was one of our readers made the point, could this have been anywhere? What made it a London novel? And actually, it's not that specific. It feels like London, but it's actually very hard to put your finger on why it's a London novel. And I think that's what I've been reaching for in the years that I've been doing this, is how is London portrayed? What is London? How do writers use our expectations of the city, our own experiences? And it's a constant. I keep coming back to it. I don't think I'm ever going to find an answer to this, but what are the features of a great London novel? They're big questions, and they're big questions in the history of the novel generally. London is such an important subject. I've got the ultimate indulgence of doing another Virginia Woolf novel, We did Mrs. Dalloway about 4 years ago.
Well, I was wondering about that because that's a sort of classic London novel, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm going to make everybody read The Years as well, because that is not seen quite so much as a London novel, but it's a Forsyth saga turned on its head by Woolf. Basically, it's a modernist Forsyth saga, entirely done impressionistically from a bird's eye view of London. For me, the pleasure I get out of it is exploring people's expectations and reactions to these portrayals of the city. Although that isn't always the big subject of conversation. So, we talk about the things that you would talk about in any book group, in whether the characterisation is convincing or whether the plot's got holes in it. I hope I create an atmosphere where everybody's contribution is welcome, whether it's somebody that's picked out a stylistic trope or an extended metaphor, or just that they really hated a particular character. To me, all those things are valuable. And what I really enjoy is people's reactions to the work. And I don't care if you liked it or didn't like it, but tell me why. What didn't you like about it? I think what drew me to the idea was that books are, on the whole, immediately accessible. You can pick up a book in a charity shop, in a library, in Waterstones. Archives aren't accessible, by and large. People don't necessarily know that archives exist. They don't know that they can just rock up at somewhere like the London Metropolitan Archives and look at stuff that day, there and then. They don't know that they don't need to be a particular type of person to access that material.
Or academics.
By and large. Absolutely. These records exist in perpetuity for everybody to consult.
There's no appointments needed. You don't have to prove your bona fides. You don't have to have a question. You just have to have a general interest in London and its history, or your family history, or the history of your street, or the history of your school, anything like that. And we will try and find something that will be of interest to you. That's what we're here for.
And for me, the most heartening thing about Book Group was I thought we would perhaps get a group of people that were regular LMA users that were also interested in books. Not at all. They were people who'd never been to LMA before. And that, for me, is the thing I'm most proud of with Book Group, is introducing a new audience to the records, making them accessible, demystifying their existence to some extent.
Let's go back to the books. Are there any others that particularly stand out in your memory as having been great discussion book?
Boswell's London Journal, which was a bit of a mad choice. I thought, I'll give them an 18th century diary, see how they get on.
And I have no idea what that would be like. I've never read him.
It's wonderful.
Is it difficult, or because Samuel Pepys is a page turner, isn't it? That's very...
Yes, Boswell's London Journal is not at all difficult. It's a young man who's come to London. He wants to make a mark in London. He wants to be admired. He wants to be well thought of, and he writes it all in his diary and castigates himself for various sins, including having sex with prostitutes on carriage crossing a bridge in London. It's just,
oh my goodness!
It is a young man in his 20s. And you can give him a beard and put him in Shoreditch, and he would be the same man with the same experience. It's amazing.
It was amazing. It was one of those things where I thought, I hope people get it. I hope people get it. And they just came and they laughed. And they laughed at James Boswell, which is possibly not what Boswell wanted. But it is just a wonderful evocation of being a young man at any period in time, but also how Georgian London is changing and developing and the attractions that are there. It's a fabulous read.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. And not
Highly
something
recommended.
You would ever sort of pick up on your own, I guess.
Completely unexpected. If you have a book group and you're interested in London and the vanities of young men, Boswell's London Journal is a good one.
And anything that you would recommend for a book club, something they might try?
Bernardine Evaristo, Mr. Loverman. Evaristo, of course, won the Booker Prize jointly with Margaret Atwood. I read it very recently. Claire had a session a while ago about it, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Barrington Walker is a gay Caribbean man in his early 70s, lives in Cazenove Road in Stoke Newington. It was just so London, I
had friends that lived in Cazenove Road, so I was immediately hooked. Evaristo gives this picture of Hackney, this multi-layered community. He is, at one hand, a father and a husband. He's the lover of a man who he has loved forever. He is all these things in this community at the same time. And he is spinning plates, trying to hold this complicated identity together.
And there is no right answer. He wants to come out, but it means betraying his wife of 50 years and potentially antagonising his children and their children and everybody that he knows apart from Morris, his lover. So he just doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what direction to go in. And as a reader, you don't know what direction he's going to go in. And it's so interesting.
We got so much out of that book. It was a very good read. Highly recommended.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. That sounds great. I'm yet to read her, actually. So
oh, she's great.
I might even start with that one.
Yeah, no, seriously.
I pulled out the famous Samuel Johnson quote, "You find no man at all intellectual who is willing to leave London. No, sir. When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. For there is in London all that life can afford." You're not going to run out of material, are you?
No, I really don't think so. I think there's so much out there and there's lots of genres that we've only really scratched the surface of.
I'm no expert in genre fiction, but I'm starting to think more about London as a trope in fantasy is quite sophisticated and quite mature now.
The Neil Gaiman Neverwhere.
We have done Neverwhere and it was hugely popular. We've also done the Aaronovitch books, which our readers absolutely loved. So there are ways that you can take it. London becomes an extended metaphor for the city, for society. Yeah, it doesn't feel like we're going to run out anytime soon, although my choices may get more obscure, I'm afraid. Just because I like pushing my readers.
You certainly do. I will never, ever forgive you for choosing Hangover Square early on. I detested that book.
Who was that
really
by?
did.
Patrick Hamilton.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Patrick Hamilton?
Nope. And I'm not going to.
They're all like that. That was I think it's 1920s, melancholia, alcoholic Fitzrovia, terrible love affairs.
Quite downbeat.
Bedsits. Oh, terrible.
The word downbeat really doesn't do it justice, Kate.
No, I don't think we really flew with that one.
Well, so many great suggestions there. Perhaps not that one, but all of the others sounded very enticing.
It's a great book, but maybe not for everyone.
Oh, well, Charlie and Claire, thank you so much for coming along and telling me about your book group.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you.
If you're interested in joining the London Metropolitan Archives Book Club, you can stay up to date with all their events by following them on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at LDNMET Archives. And I'll put that link in our show notes. Books mentioned this episode were Penelope Lively's City of the Mind, This Is London by Ben Judah, and do check out our episode 9 for my book club's spirited discussion of that book. Margery Allingham's Campion novels, including The Tiger in the Smoke, Mrs. Dalloway and the Years by Virginia Woolf, Mr. Loverman and Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, James Boswell's London Journal, Hangover Square by Patrick Hamilton, Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, and Ben Aaronovitch's Rivers of London series. On our next show, we'll be discussing Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, a haunting tale of love and murder set in the marshland of South Carolina that has found millions of readers, topping bestseller lists around the world. But what did my book club think? Were they as ravished as Reese Witherspoon, who didn't read the last 10 pages because she didn't want the book to end? Listen in to find out. But before that is our next bookshelf show, in which Laura and I run through our recent reads outside of book club. Listen in for our take on Exciting Times by Nisha Doolan, Early Riser by Jasper Fforde, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, The Hottest Dishes of the Tatar Cuisine by Alina Bronsky, Weather by Jenny Offill, and Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. That episode is coming soon. If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, or email thebookclubreview@gmail.com. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? If you like what we do, please do take a moment to rate, review and subscribe to us on iTunes. It helps other listeners find us and means you'll never miss an episode. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.